Guys, what if I say India is now building a company that is competing with SpaceX? 8 years ago in Hyderabad, two founders, Pawan and Bharat, decided to resign from their prestigious jobs as a scientist at ISRO. And for what? To build a space startup called Skyroot Aerospace. If you look at India's history, for decades the space was a government thing and no private organizations were allowed to build and launch their own rockets. So the idea of a private Indian company building and launching its own rocket was not just unlikely, it was technically not allowed. And what's wild is that this story starts not in some high-tech lab or some fancy Silicon Valley office. It starts with a LinkedIn cold message that somehow got reply. It starts in 2018, 2 years before the Indian government even made it legal to launch a private rocket in this country. Today we'll see exactly how they did it, what they built, why the whole world is suddenly obsessed with space, how they actually make money from rockets, and why what just happened on July 18, 2026 is one of the most important things to happen in Indian tech in a very long time.
3, 2, 1, 0.
And we have liftoff of Vikram 1.
This is the full story of Skyroot Aerospace. Let's get into it. Before we get into Skyroot, we need to understand the world they were born into. Because the space industry has changed more in the last 15 years than it did in the 50 years before that. And to understand why, I want to start with something that has nothing to do with rockets. Solar panels. Why solar panels? Let's see. In 2010, generating 1 watt of electricity from a solar panel cost around 200 rupees. By 2026, that same watt cost around 10 rupees. That's 20 times cost reduction in 15 years. That question is, how? Like the basic technology was same, then what caused the price reduction? The answer is manufacturing at massive scales with better materials and more competition. And eventually the cost just kept falling until things that were previously impossible became ordinary. The exact same transformation is now happening with rockets, and it changes everything. Folks, traditionally launching 1 kilogram of anything into space costs somewhere between 50 to 70,000 US dollars. A small satellite weighing 100 kilograms could cost $5 to $7 million just to get off the ground before you even count what it costs to build the satellite. At that price, only governments and the largest corporations could even consider going to the space. Then something changed. SpaceX asked a question that seems obviously, but nobody had seriously tried to answer before. What if the rocket came back? What if instead of burning up in the atmosphere or falling into the ocean after every launch, the rocket landed itself and flew again? On 21st December 2015, SpaceX fundamentally changed the space industry by successfully launching Falcon 9.
BC, start the launch auto sequence. In order for launch. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff of the Falcon 9.
An orbital class reusable rocket. Reusability changed the economics completely. SpaceX Falcon 9 has now landed and reflown its booster dozens of times, and as a result, the cost per kilogram to orbit dropped to around $3,000 and it's still falling. When something gets dramatically cheaper, entirely new industries become possible. Like think what happened when internet costs collapsed in the late 90s and early 20s. In 1998, having a website was expensive, storing data was expensive, sending in information across the world was expensive. The cheap internet didn't just improve existing industries, it created entirely new ones that nobody had imagined. SpaceX is at the exact same inflection point right now, and the industries it's about to create are going to be just as surprising. Now here's the part I really want you to understand, because most people hear space and they think astronauts, rocket exhaust and beautiful photographs of Earth from orbit. But the real story of what cheaper space access means is much more grounded. It's about farmers, fishermen and the internet connection on your phone. Let me give you 3 examples that genuinely changed how I think about this. The first one is space detection for farmers. Satellites today carry cameras so precise they can detect a temperature difference of 0.1 degrees Celsius from 450 kilometers above the Earth. Whether a plant is stressed, whether by insects, disease or lack of water, the leaves change temperature slightly before any visible sign of damage appears. A satellite can detect that change from orbit It can identify exactly which rows in a field are under attack before the farmer can see anything wrong with his own eyes, before the pests spread to the rest of the crops. Today, this technology is expensive because satellites are expensive to build and expensive to launch. As launch costs fall, more satellites go up, more data becomes available, prices come down, and eventually a farmer in rural Maharashtra can open an app on his basic smartphone and see a precise map of exactly where the problem is in his field. Those apps will be powered by satellites, and guess what helps these satellites reach to the orbit? Rockets. The second example involves fishermen, and this one ISRO has actually already been doing for years without nearly enough recognition. Indian fishermen traditionally head out to sea and search for fish based on experience and intuition, burning enormous amounts of fuel covering areas that might have nothing. ISRO solved this problem using their satellites to track ocean temperatures, gradients, planktons, concentrations, and current patterns, and use that data to build maps of what they call potential fishing zones. These zones get broadcast to boats before they leave port, so fishermen know where exactly the fishes are, and as a result, fishermen save collectively billions of rupees in fuel costs every year. This is a practical example of satellites directly improving the income of some of the most economically vulnerable people in the country. The third example is further into the future, but it's coming. Data centers in space. You know, the biggest operating cost of the data centers running AI systems today is electricity and cooling. AI models require enormous amounts of computing power which generate heat, which requires water and massive cooling systems to cool the data centers. Also, building a new data center on the ground takes years of permitting land acquisition, construction, and enormous upfront capital. Now think about space. In certain orbits, a satellite has continuous exposure to the sun, 24 hours a day, no atmospheric filtering, which means 7 to 8 times the energy density compared to solar panels on the ground. For cooling, you simply radiate heat into the cold space. No water required, no cooling tower required, no land to buy, and no local government approvals. If launch cost falls to a few $100s per kilogram, putting computing infrastructure in space could become cheaper than building it on ground. The future of AI, the thing everyone is calling the most important technology of our time, might actually run on servers orbiting above our heads. These are not science fiction scenarios, these are things that companies are actively building towards. And the rocket companies are the ones making it possible by reducing what it costs to get there. Now let's understand the specific world that existed in India when Skyroot started, because it makes everything that follows make much more sense. For 60 years, space in India meant ISRO. The Indian Space Research Organization had an absolute monopoly on Indian space activities. Every rocket that launched from Indian soil was an ISRO rocket. Every satellite that India put into orbit was an ISRO mission. Private companies could supply components and materials to ISRO as contractors, but they could never independently build and launch their own rockets. There was no law permitting it, no regulatory pathway, no framework of any kind, and to be clear, ISRO earned that position. These are the people who reached Mars orbit on India's very first attempt, a feat no other country had achieved. They landed near the south pole of the moon for the first time in the human history. They built and operated the PSLV rocket so reliably that it became one of the most trusted launch vehicles in the world. The entire cumulative budget of India's space program across 60 years is less than a single year of NASA's budget. And what ISRO achieved on that budget is genuinely astonishing. But ISRO was built for different missions. National science, national priorities, national prestige, not commercial markets. And while ISRO was busy achieving remarkable things for India, a completely different kind of space economy was exploding globally. Small satellite devices the size of shoebox weighing under 300 kilograms were becoming genuinely capable. They could observe the Earth with extraordinary precision, they could provide internet connectivity, they could track ships and aircrafts and weather systems, and hundreds of companies around the world wanted to launch them quickly, flexibly, affordably. They needed launch vehicles that fit their requirements, not national mission schedules. India had the engineering talent to serve this market, but it couldn't because no private Indian company was permitted to launch rocket. Then on May 16, 2020, that changed. The government announced that India's space sector was opening to private enterprise, not just as component suppliers, as independent players capable of designing, building, and launching their own rockets. A new body called InSpace, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center, was created to handle the approvals and give private companies access to ISRO's testing facilities. 60 years of monopoly over. But Skyroot had started 2 years earlier in 2018 when none of this existed yet. Pawan Kumar Chandan grew up in Visakhapatnam. In school, he once scored 51 out of 100 in maths. Not a prodigy, not the obvious future rocket scientist, but he made it to IIT Kharagpur, where engineering clicked for him in a way it never had before. When ISRO visited campus for recruitment, which was rare, Pawan did sit for any other placement interviews. He made up his mind on the spot. He got selected and joined as a scientist and walked into ISRO's facilities for the first time to find massive hangars housing enormous rocket stages. He got goosebumps. He knew this was where he needed to be. At ISRO, he ended up working on the LVM-3, the Bahubali, India's most powerful rocket that would later carry Chandrayaan-3 to the moon. Working on something at that scale where a single missed detail can mean mission failure, where every decision has to be justified against physics and not just convention, that's where he became the engineer that would eventually build Skyroot. He learned not just how rockets work, but why every design choice exists, what the alternatives are, what the evolution of rocket technology looks like across decades. Naga Bharat Dhaka was also an ISRO scientist and IIT Madras alumnus. He and Pawan started having the same conversations repeatedly over time. What if India had a private rocket company? At that time, the global small satellite market was accelerating. Indian engineering costs were globally competitive. ISRO had proven the country could build world-class rockets. The fundamentals was there. Someone was going to build this eventually. Why not them? In June 2018, both of them resigned from ISRO. No startup experience, no investor contacts, no idea how fundraising worked in any practical sense, no regulatory framework for what they intended to do. The policy that would eventually make their work legal didn't exist yet. They were starting a rocket company in a country where launching a private rocket was technically not allowed. Pawan had to look up what a term sheet was on Google. He had to figure out what equity meant by reading it online. And for his first investor, he went to LinkedIn. His friend sent a cold message to Mukesh Bansal, the founder of Myntra and Cultfit, someone they had no personal connection to. Bansal replied them the same day. They flew to Bangalore. In under an hour of conversation, Bansal committed to invest 10 CR. The decision wasn't based on a detailed financial model or a market analysis report. It was based on two people who had walked away from safe, respected, stable careers to build something their own government hadn't yet decided to allow. That kind of conviction is either madness or the clearest possible signal that something important is being built. Bansal decided it was latter. Skyroot Aerospace was founded in June 2018. They set up at T Hyderabad's startup hub with 10 employees, mostly former ISRO scientists who believed enough to make the same bet. To really understand what Skyroot was attempting, you need to understand the fundamental physics of why rockets are so hard. Earth's gravity is relentless. To pull a satellite into orbit, you don't just need to go up, you need to go sideways so far that you keep missing the Earth as you fall. Orbital velocity at 450 kilometers, altitude is about 7.6 kilometers per second, that's roughly 27,000 kilometers per hour. Getting any object to that speed requires an enormous amount of energy, and the fuel required to generate that energy is heavy, which means you need more fuel to carry the fuel, which means you need more fuel for that, and so on. So basically, it's a compounding problem. The engineering solution is staging. You build the rocket in sections. The bottom section has the biggest engine and burns fuel for the first part of the flight. Once its fuel is gone, it separates and falls away because there's no point carrying the empty tank and engine all the way to the orbit. The next stage ignites, takes over, and when its fuel is spent, it separates. Saving mass is a central obsession of every rocket engineer who has ever lived. For a small rocket, this physics becomes more brutal. On the large rocket, you have room to add structural reinforcement, reductant systems, backup components, all the things that increase the reliability. On a small rocket, every gram of extra structure is a gram taken away from the payload. You're optimizing down to individual bolts. There is no margin for anything that doesn't absolutely need to be there. This is counterintuitively why Skyroot chose to build small rockets first. Not because it's easier, it's actually harder in many ways, but because the engineering discipline required to make a small rocket work prepares you for everything. It forces a level of design rigor that you can't shortcut, and the capital required is orders of magnitude less than what a large rocket demands. To build a large rocket competitive with SpaceX from day one would have required raising $500 million before a single successful launch. Skyroot chose a different path. Build small, prove the technology, earn the trust, and then scale. The engine testing program began with the Kalam 5. A small-scale solid engine named after Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Then came the Kalam 100, a full-scale engine, full duration testing, stage integration testing, vibration testing, thermal testing, structural testing. Every major system had to be validated before it flew. This took years of careful methodical work with a small team. The entire structure of Vikram S, the first rocket, was not steel, not aluminium, but carbon fiber, dramatically lighter for the same strength. The four thrusters used for spin stabilization were 3D printed solid propellant units. 3D printing rocket components is genuinely uncommon globally. It reduces manufacturing time and cost, and it allows design iterations that would take months with traditional manufacturing to happen in days. On November 18, 2022, 11:30 in the morning at Sriharikota, the Vikram S sits at the sounding rocket complex of the Satish Dhawan Space Center. That location is not incidental. This is the same complex where India launched its first sounding rocket in 1963. India's space story began at this facility. Now, for the first time in history, a privately built Indian rocket was about to leave it. Vikram S is carrying three payloads: Space Kids India, and Space Tech India, and Bazu MQ, a company from Armenia. That last payload is the one that stops you in your tracks when you think about it. Before Skyroot had ever launched a single rocket, a company from another country looked at what this 4-year-old Hyderabad startup was doing and decided to put their payload on it. That's not common. A foreign company trusting you with your first rocket launch, that's not common at all. That's trust earned through technical credibility. The countdown reaches 0, the engine slides, and the Vikram S lifts off from the Indian soil for the first time.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Event number 96 completed.
And we have a successful liftoff of Vikram S rocket.
It climbs to a peak altitude of 88.8 kilometers at Mach 5.07, that's 5 times the speed of sound. The internationally recognized boundary of space, the Karman line, which is at distance of 100 kilometers. Vikram 5 didn't cross it because this was a suborbital flight designed to demonstrate the vehicle system, not to reach the orbit. But 88.8 kilometers is genuinely the edge of space. At that altitude, the sky above you is black. The flight lasts 301.4 seconds. The vehicle splashes down 125 kilometers offshore in the Bay of Bengal where planned. Everything worked. In Skyroot's mission control room, people were crying openly, without embarrassment, because these were the engineers who had walked away from ISRO, from the stability and the prestige of government careers, who had spent 4 years building something that had never been attempted in India's private sector before, who had been told in various ways at various times that this was too difficult, too early, too much. And a number on the screen just confirmed that it worked. The mission was called Praram, a Sanskrit word meaning the beginning. They chose the name deliberately because this wasn't a destination, it was the starting line. Here's something that confuses a lot of people about commercial space sector. How does a rocket company actually make money? The answer is simple than it sounds. Skyroot is a logistics company, an extraordinarily high-tech logistics company, but a logistics company. They move things from Earth to space, and so the satellite companies pay them for the transportation. Now the global satellite industry has a specific structure that matters here. More than 90% of the satellites being launched today weigh under 300 kilograms. That's the market Skyroot is eventually targeting. And within that market, there are two fundamentally different types of customers. The first type wants to go to the popular, well-trafficked orbits, the orbits where most internet and the communication satellites cluster. For these customers, a ride share on a large rocket like SpaceX Falcon 9 makes sense. It's like taking a train hub to hub, scheduled departure shared with dozens of other passengers. The second type needs something different. They need a specific orbit, a specific angle to the equator, a specific altitude that gives the satellite the best possible coverage of their region of interest. For a company building Earth observation satellites over Southeast Asia, for a company needing precise polar coverage, for a defense customer requiring a specific ground track, the standard orbits don't work. They need to go somewhere specific. For those customers, Skyroot is like a Uber cab. You book the whole rocket, you go exactly where you need, when you need to go. That's a premium service and it's one with almost no competition globally. That's essentially the only option if you need an Uber to orbit. The revenue per launch for this kind of service can reach 100 crore rupees. At 20 launches per year, that's 2000 crore rupees annually in annual revenue from one rocket type, and unlike most businesses, the scaling path is straightforward. build more rockets, do more launches, and the revenue grows proportionally. Vikram 1, the orbital rocket, can carry 350 to 450 kilograms. LEO, that is the lower Earth orbit, that covers the vast majority of what the small satellite market actually needs right now. On July 18, 2026, Skyroot Aerospace was ready to launch the first rocket Vikram 1. Vikram 1 is 4 stages tall, 24 meters from base to tip, made entirely from carbon composite, which gives it structural strength, which dramatically less weight than metal. The first 3 stages run on solid propellant, which is reliable, dense, and doesn't require complex plumbing. The 4th stage, the orbital adjustment module, runs on 3D printed liquid engine capable of starting, stopping, and restarting in the vacuum of space. Then to restart, capability is the key detail. It's what separates Vikram 1 from a simple ballistic trajectory. It can precisely place payloads at exactly the right point in exactly the right orbit, which is the whole point of the cab to space model. The precision matters as much as the reach. The payloads reflect exactly who Skyroot's customers are and where the market is heading. Graha Space, an Indian Earth observation startup, is flying a nano satellite, Pathfinder. Cosmos Space, an Indian company working on space debris removal, is flying a robotic arm called Embrace, designed to capture defunct satellites. D-Cube, a German aerospace company, is flying a technology demonstration. And there's something that made me stop when I read about it. Cosmos Diamonds, a Bangalore company, has sent a lab-grown diamond into orbit as part of an artwork they called Cosmic Bloom, the first space-flown lab diamond in history, sitting inside an Indian private rocket. At 11:30 am IST on July 18, Vikram 1 had lifted off from the Satish Dhawan Space Center. 16 minutes later, all 4 stages had performed exactly as planned. All separations completed, the orbital adjustment module fired its liquid engine and injected its payload into a 450 km orbit. India had become the 3rd country in the world with private orbital launch capability after the successful launch of Vikram 1. The mission was called Agman, a Sanskrit word meaning arrival, because they had arrived. Let me put some numbers around why this matters beyond the pride of the moment. India's space economy is currently around $8 billion. That sounds significant until you see the global context. The global space industry is expected to cross $1 trillion by 2040. Today, the US accounts for roughly 55% of the global space economy. China contributes around 10 to 15%. Europe about 8 to 12%, Japan about 3 to 5%, while India currently contributes around 2 to 3%, a figure the country aims to increase significantly over the coming decade. India has an official target to grow that to 10% within this decade. 10% of a $1 trillion industry is $100 billion. That's not government spending on space missions, that commercial revenue, Indian companies billing the international customers, high technology exports, jobs for engineers and scientists and technicians. Revenue from cap to space market, from satellite manufacturing, from Earth observation services, from in-space serving, from downstream applications built on top of space infrastructure. And the downstream applications are the part that reaches into ordinary Indian life. When more Indian satellites are in orbit, the data they generate becomes more cheaper and more accessible. Precision agricultural tools becomes affordable for farmers with a small land holdings. Insurance companies can verify crop damages from satellite without sending physical accesses to every village. Remote areas get connectivity through satellite. Internet weather forecasting improves. Disaster response gets faster. Urban planning gets smarter. This is infrastructure, not the romantic, visible infrastructure of highways and bridges. The invisible infrastructure that quietly makes everything work better. And just like roads in the 1950s and the internet in the 2000s, the generation that builds it will set the terms for the economy that follows. There's a detail from the beginning of the story that I keep coming back to. Pavan Kumar Chandan once scored 51 out of 100 in mathematics. The person who just put India's first privately built rocket into the orbit once nearly failed math in school. And when Skyroot started in 2018, everything that would normally be required to build a rocket company was missing. No policy, no investors, no precedent, no legal permissions, no template to follow. That's exactly the point when nothing exists yet. That's when the opportunity is actually open. Because if everything were already in place, someone else would have been already doing it. What Pavan and Bharat did was decide that the absence of a framework wasn't a reason to wait. It was a reason to start building. They started with a LinkedIn call message and initial 10 crore funding. 8 years later, their rocket is in the orbit. In November 2022, they call it Prarambh, the beginning. Today, they call it Agman, the arrival. Both names were exactly right. That's all from my side for today. If you found this case study valuable, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends to support our work. And for more such insightful science, history, business, AI and case studies, subscribe to our channel Decode with Lalit and hit that bell icon so that you get notified when I upload the next video. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.